I'm Rosalind Hale, 44 years old, and I've spent more than 2 decades in the Marine Corps. In a uniform, I was never quite able to explain to the people I love most. For years, I quietly raised and paid for my younger brother after our father died and let him believe I was nothing more than a woman with a desk job. But when he called me worthless in front of his entire squad and put his hands on my collar, one man on that deck knew exactly who I was, and everything changed in a single morning. Have you ever been dismissed by someone you gave everything to? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being wronged, hit that like button and subscribe. The winter our father got sick, I made a promise at a kitchen table that I have kept every single day since, and I never once told the person it was about. Dominic was 12 that year. I was 32. There are 18 years between us, which means I was already most of the way to grown by the time he was born. Already gone to the academy, already wearing a uniform he was too small to understand. People used to assume we were mother and son when I brought him places, and I stopped correcting them because the truth took longer and hurt more. Our mother left when he was 4. Our father held the two of us together with the sheer stubbornness of a man who had spent 20 years in the Marine Corps and did not know how to quit anything. And then his heart began to fail, and the stubbornness was not enough. I remember him at that table, with his hands flat on the wood, the way he used to sit when he was about to say something he had already decided. He looked older than the calendar said he was. He looked at me for a long time before he spoke. "He's going to need someone harder than me," my father said. "That was always going to be you, Roz." I did not decide to raise my brother. I just looked up one winter and realized that no one else was going to. I signed the forms. I moved money I could not always explain into an account that paid for his braces, his cleats, his first car, the deposit on the apartment he wanted at 19 when he decided he could not live under anyone's roof. I did it from a lot of places I was not allowed to name. In the gaps between the work that was my actual life, and I never sent a bill and I never kept a ledger, because that is not what you do for your own blood. What I could not give him was the one thing he wanted most, which was our father. So I let him have the next best thing. I let him have the myth. Our father was a Marine, a real one, boots and rifle, and a chest full of ribbons Dominic used to touch with one finger like they were holy. I let that story get bigger than me, because a boy who has lost his dad needs a hero more than he needs an accurate accounting of his sister. He would salute the photograph on the mantel. It was a picture of our father at 25, lean and squared away, and Dominic would stand in front of it in his socks and bring his little hand up the way he had seen in movies, and I would stand in the doorway and say nothing. I wore the same eagle, globe, and anchor that man had worn. I had earned things he never got the chance to earn. I could have told my brother that. I could have said, "The hero you are looking for is standing right here, holding your dinner." I never did. I told myself it was humility. I told myself he was too young. The truth is that it was easier to be loved as the person who paid for things than to be seen as the person I actually was, because the person I actually was could not be discussed at parent-teacher conferences or over the phone with his friends listening in. Dad was a Marine, Dominic told me once, maybe 13, chin up, certain. I'm going to be a real one. I know you are, I said. He heard agreement. He did not hear the whole sentence I was swallowing. I had already been a real one for a decade. I had already done things on the far side of the world that I would carry to my grave without a word. But my brother was looking at a photograph, and I was only the woman in the doorway, and I decided that was a fine thing to be if it kept him whole. That was the shape of us for years. I gave and he took, and neither of us called it that, because when it is family, you call it love, and you leave the arithmetic alone. I told myself the arithmetic did not matter. I was wrong about that, the way you are wrong about a small stone in your boot on the first mile, before the second mile teaches you what it costs. My father died in the spring, 2 years after that conversation at the table. Dominic was 14. At the funeral, he stood next to me in a suit I had bought him the day before, and he cried the way boys cry when they're trying not to, and I put my arm around him and I did not cry at all, because one of us had to be the wall and it was always going to be me. My father was right about that. After the service, an old gunnery sergeant who had served with my dad took my hand and held it a beat longer than a handshake needs. He looked at me like he knew something. Maybe he did. The community I belong to is small, and word travels in it even when names do not. He did not say anything in front of Dominic. He just nodded once, the way one Marine nods at another, and then he let go and told my brother his father had been a good man. Dominic glowed at that. A stranger had confirmed the myth. On the drive home, he talked the whole way about the kind of Marine he was going to be, the real kind, and I drove and listened and felt the stone shift in my boot and told myself it was nothing. I want to be honest about my part in all of it, because this is not a story about a cruel brother and a blameless sister. I built the pedestal. I handed him the story and told him it was the whole truth. Every year I stayed quiet. I taught him that the woman who signed the checks was not a person who had ever done anything worth respecting. By the time he was grown, he did not know he was standing on my shoulders. He thought the view was his. I could live with being unseen. What I did not expect was to be used, out loud, in front of men in my own uniform, as the thing you point to when you want to prove you are better than someone. But that came later. First he had to grow up, and enlist, and learn just enough about the Corps to think he understood the whole of it. By the time he shipped to boot camp at 18, Dominic had stopped asking me for anything, which I mistook for growth. He wanted to do it himself, he said, and I respected that, so I stepped back and let him. I mailed the letters recruits are allowed to receive, and I stood in the family section at his graduation, and I watched him cross the parade deck as a new Marine, and my chest ached with a pride I could not fully explain to the people around me, because the pride of an officer watching a private is a different thing than the pride of a sister, and I was both at once and could say neither out loud. He came home hard and loud and sure of himself, the way new Marines do, and somewhere in the first year the story about me curdled. I did not see it happen. I only heard the result on a phone call when he laughed and repeated something his buddies had said about the people who sit behind desks while the real Marines do the work. "No offense, Roz," he said. "You wouldn't get it. It's a different world in the actual Corps." I was standing in a stairwell 4,000 miles from him at the time, in a building I could not describe to you, having come off a night that I will also never describe. And I held the phone, and I looked at the concrete wall, and I said, "You're probably right." He did not hear the thing under my voice. Why would he? I had spent his whole life making sure he never learned to listen for it. Over the next couple of years, the story got firmer, the way a story does when no one contradicts it. I became, in his telling, the sister with the vague government job, the one who never really served, who paid for things because she had nothing better to do with a paycheck she had not earned the hard way. He said it lightly. He did not mean it as a knife. That is the part that took me longest to make peace with. He was not being cruel. He genuinely believed it, because I had spent 18 years making the belief comfortable. I talked about it once with Gwen Talbot, a major I had come up alongside, one of maybe 3 people in the world who knew both halves of my life. We were sitting on the tailgate of her truck after a long week, and I told her about the phone calls, the desk jokes, the way my brother had turned me into a punchline he did not know how to face. "Why don't you just tell him?" Gwen said. "Tell him what? Half of it's classified and the other half sounds like bragging. So he gets to build a whole personality out of looking down on you, and you just let him, because correcting him would be awkward." She shook her head. "You keep protecting a kid who's using you as a punchline. At some point that stops being humility, Roz. At some point it's just cowardice wearing humility's coat." That landed harder than she meant it to, or maybe exactly as hard as she meant it to. Gwen never said anything by accident. "He lost his dad at 14, I said. "He needed a hero. I gave him one that fit on the mantle. He's 22. He doesn't need a hero on the mantle anymore. He needs to know who his sister actually is." She bumped my shoulder with hers. "And maybe you need him to know too. There's no medal for suffering in silence. They don't hand those out." I did not answer her. I sat on that tailgate and watched the light go down over the motor pool, and I thought about the photograph of my father and the boy in his socks bringing his hand up to it, and I thought, not yet. He is not ready, which was, if I am honest, another way of saying I am not ready, dressed up in his clothes. I hung up on a lot of those phone calls with the truth still sitting in my mouth. I would set the phone down and feel it there, heavy, unspoken, and I would tell myself there would be a right time, a softer time, a time when telling him would be a gift instead of a rebuke. I kept waiting for that time the way you wait for weather to change on a mountain, standing still, getting colder, telling yourself it will break any minute. What I did not plan for was the Corps itself deciding the time for me. Because the Marine Corps is smaller than it looks, and careers bend back toward each other, and one spring I opened a set of orders and saw the name of a base I knew, and under it a battalion, and I realized that my next posting was going to put me on the same ground as my little brother. I was going to arrive as the senior officer over the unit that held his company. He did not know I was coming. He did not know what I would be wearing when I did. I told myself I would find a quiet moment to tell him first. I told myself a lot of things. I have learned that the moments you plan are almost never the ones you get. I arrived on a Tuesday in the flat gray light of an early morning in my service uniform with the silver oak leaves of a lieutenant colonel on my collar. I had asked the company commander for something unusual. I asked him not to announce me. I told him I wanted to walk the line of one of his companies unannounced, to see the Marines as they actually were on an ordinary morning, before anyone had a chance to square away a show for the new senior officer. It is a thing you can ask for when you have the rank to ask it, and Captain Neil Ashford, a serious young officer with a careful way of speaking, agreed, though I could see he did not love it. I did not tell him my brother was in that company. I did not tell anyone. I wanted, just once, to see who Dominic had become when he did not know his sister was watching. I told myself it was command curiosity. It was not only that. It was a sister, hungry, hanging back at the edge of a formation to look at a boy she had raised. The company was formed up on the deck for morning accountability. I stood off to the side with Captain Ashford, a little behind him, in the plain khaki of a service uniform with no fanfare, and I let my eyes move down the ranks until I found him. Dominic had filled out. He stood in the second rank with his cover low over his eyes and his chin up, and there was a swagger in him even standing still, the easy confidence of a young Marine who has decided he has the place figured out. My throat tightened. He looked like our father. He looked like the photograph on the mantel, grown up and breathing. Then he saw me. I watched recognition move across his face, and I watched it turn, in the space of a breath, from surprise into something performed, because his squad was right there, and my brother had an audience, and the story he told about me was one of his best. He grinned. He stepped out of the rank without being released, which even then I noted, and he came across the deck toward me with his arms wide like this was a show he had been waiting to put on. "You have got to be kidding me," he said, loud for the benefit of the men behind him. "Look who wandered onto a real base." A couple of the younger Marines laughed, uncertain, glancing at each other. "Dominic," I said quietly, "get back in your rank." He did not look at my collar. That is the thing I keep coming back to. He was so certain of who I was that he never once looked at the silver on my collar, never registered the way Captain Ashford had gone still beside me. He saw his sister. He only ever saw his sister. "This is my sister," he announced, turning to his squad, jerking a thumb at me. "The one I told you about. Government job. Sits at a desk. Never served a real day in her life." He looked back at me and his grin widened. "Worthless. No offense, Roz, but you're on the wrong deck, sweetheart. Real Marines only." The laughter got a little braver, and then he did the thing I did not see coming. He reached out and shoved my shoulder, the way you would move a civilian out of a doorway, and when I did not move fast enough for the show he wanted, he grabbed a fistful of my collar to steer me back off the deck. I did not react. 44 years old and 2 decades of training told my body to stay perfectly still. And I let him hold my collar, and I looked at my brother's face and felt something in my chest go very quiet and very cold. That is when Gunnery Sergeant Silas Renner came off the side of the formation like the deck had tilted under him. I had not seen him standing there. I had been looking at Dominic. But Renner had been looking at me, and Renner knew my face, because 13 years earlier, on a ridgeline on the other side of the planet, I had carried him down 800 meters of scree with 2 rounds in me and 1 arm hooked under his shoulders, while the world came apart around us. He was a sergeant then, 28 and bleeding out, and I was a captain who had gone back up a hill. Everyone else was coming down. I did not know until this exact moment that he had ever made it to this base, to this company, to my brother's platoon. He crossed the deck in 4 strides. His face had gone completely white. He tore Dominic's hand off my collar, and he put himself between us. And then he did something I would never have ordered, and could never have stopped. He backhanded my brother across the chest, hard, an open crack of a blow that staggered Dominic back a full step, and his voice came out shaking with a fury I recognized, because I had heard men use it over the bodies of their friends. "Get your hand off her," Renner said. Then he came to attention so fast his boots cracked together, and he raised his voice so the entire company could hear it. "That is Lieutenant Colonel Hale. She carried me down that mountain under fire when I was your age, Marine. She went back up when the rest of us were running down." The deck went silent. Not the ordinary silence of a formation. The other kind. The kind that falls when everyone realizes at once that the ground they were standing on was never what they thought it was. Dominic stared at me. His hand was still half raised where Renner had knocked it away from my collar. His mouth opened and nothing came out. I watched him look at my collar for the first time. I watched his eyes find the silver oak leaves and understand them. I watched the story he had told for years, the one he had just performed for his squad, come apart in his hands in front of the exact people he had told it to. "Colonel," Captain Ashford said very quietly, stepping forward, his own face gray. "Ma'am, I did not know he was. I did not know." "I know you didn't," I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. "Nobody did. That was the point." The squad had snapped to attention the moment Renner said my rank, a ripple of bodies going rigid down the whole formation, eyes locked forward, every one of them suddenly aware that they had just laughed at a lieutenant colonel and a raider, and the woman who had carried their own gunnery sergeant off a mountain. Dominic stood in the middle of them, the only one not at attention, because he did not know what to do with his body, because the sister he had spent his life looking down on was standing in front of him, wearing more rank than he would see in 20 years, and there was nowhere to put his eyes. I let the silence sit for one more second. Then I did the only thing that mattered. "At ease," I said to the company. "Gunnery Sergeant Renner, stand down. Nobody's putting hands on anybody else today, including you." Renner's jaw was tight. "Ma'am, he assaulted a senior officer. I saw it. Every man here saw it." "I saw it too," I said. "Stand down, Gunny. That's an order, and it's the second one I've given you in 13 years, and you followed the first one, so I know you can hear me." Something broke behind his eyes at that. Some memory of a mountain, and he came down off the edge of himself and said, "Aye, ma'am," and stepped back. I looked at my brother. He looked like a boy again. He looked 12 years old in his socks in front of a photograph, except the photograph had turned around and looked back at him, and it was me. "Lance Corporal Hale," I said, "you're dismissed to your commander. We'll talk later, you and I, not here." That first hour after the deck emptied, everyone wanted to make it into something bigger than I wanted it to be. Captain Ashford walked me to the company office with the stiff, careful stride of a man rehearsing an apology, and the moment the door closed, he laid it out for me plainly. There were witnesses. An entire company had watched a lance corporal put hands on a lieutenant colonel, grab her collar, shove her in front of a formation. That was not a family squabble. Under the code we both served, that was assault on a senior commissioned officer, and it did not matter that we shared a last name. "Ma'am, that was assault on a senior officer in front of the whole company," Ashford said. "If you want to pursue it, you have every witness you could ever need. Say the word, and I'll start the paperwork this morning." I stood at his window and looked out at the deck where it had happened, empty now, and I thought about the word. I could feel how easy it would be to say it. There is a version of this story where I say the word, and my brother learns a lesson, written in charges and rank reductions, and a mark that follows him the rest of his career, and it would be just, and it would be earned, and it would be the cleanest thing. "I did not come here to end my brother," I said. "I came to see the man he'd become. I got my answer. I don't need the paperwork to underline it." "With respect, ma'am, the other Marines watched it happen. There's no consequence, that's a lesson too." He was right, and I told him he was right, because a good officer does not pretend a hard truth away just because it is inconvenient. The men had seen it. If nothing at all happened, they would learn that rank could be disrespected as long as you were related to it. That was not a lesson I was willing to teach either. "There will be a consequence," I said. "It just won't be the one that ends him. Give me a day. Let me handle my own family in a way I can live with. And if I can't make it right, I'll come to you and we'll do it your way by the book, and I won't flinch." Ashford studied me for a moment, and then he nodded, because he was a careful man, and he could see I was not asking him to bury anything. I was asking him for a day. Renner found me in the parking lot after. He was still pale under his tan, and he stood in front of me and could not quite meet my eyes, which is a hard thing to watch in a gunnery sergeant. "Ma'am, I put hands on one of my own Marines," he said, in front of the company. I acted before I thought. "Whatever comes to me for that, I'll take it." "You defended a senior officer who was being assaulted," I said. "Then you stopped when I told you to. That's the whole event, Gunny. Don't build a gallows out of it." He looked at me then. "I've told the story of that mountain 100 times, he said low. "To my kids, to Marines who needed to hear what it looks like when somebody doesn't quit on you. I never knew your name to give it. And then I look up this morning and there you are, and some kid's got your collar in his fist." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry, I didn't know he was your brother." "He didn't know I was your colonel," I said. "We've all been carrying half a story around. Today the halves met." I sent him back to work. And then I sat in my vehicle in that parking lot for a long time, longer than I want to admit, with my hands on the wheel and my brother's face in my mind. And I let myself feel the thing I had not let myself feel on the deck. Not anger. I had expected anger. What I felt was grief, old and heavy, for all the years I had chosen silence and called it love, and for the boy who had built a whole way of standing in the world on a lie I had handed him myself. Somewhere across the base, in a barracks room, my brother was sitting with the wreckage of the story he had told about me. And I knew him well enough to know he was not thinking about the rank or the mountain or the witnesses. He was thinking, in the flat, sick way you think after you have broken something, about every time he had said the word worthless, and to whom, and how many of them had been laughing. I could have left him in that room to drown. Part of me, the tired part, wanted to. But I had made a promise at a kitchen table when he was 12, and the promise did not have an expiration date, and it did not come with the condition that he be worthy of it. That is not what a promise is. I called Gwen Talbot that night because she was the one person who knew both halves of me and would not let me lie to myself about either. I told her what had happened, the shove, the collar, the word worthless, Renner coming off the formation like the deck had tilted. She was quiet for a long moment on the line. "So the thing you were afraid of for 18 years finally happened," she said. "He humiliated you in front of your own corps, and the world didn't end." "It didn't feel like the world ending," I admitted. "It felt like a wall coming down. I've been holding that wall up so long I forgot it was heavy." "You going to charge him?" "No." "Good," she said, "because charging him would let him off easy. He'd get to be the victim of his mean colonel's sister instead of the man who has to live with what he did. Make him live with it, Roz. That's the harder road, and it's the only one that goes anywhere." She paused. "And for once in your life, let him see you. All the way, not the checkbook, not the wall. You. You've been rationing yourself to that kid since he was 12. Stop." I did not answer her right away. I sat in the dark with the phone against my ear and thought about how many times she had told me some version of this, on tailgates and in stairwells and over bad coffee, and how many times I had nodded and gone on hiding anyway. "I hear you," I said finally. "Do you, though?" she said, not unkindly, and we both knew the answer was going to have to be proven, not spoken. I decided that night, in my quarters, what kind of reckoning this was going to be. Not the kind that ends a man, the kind that finally tells him the truth and then makes him carry it, which is harder than any charge sheet and lasts longer. I called Dominic to my office the next morning. I had them put my name on the door before he came, the full thing, rank and name, because I wanted him to have to read it before he knocked. It was not cruelty. It was the first honest sentence I had shown my brother in 18 years, and it needed to be in writing, on a door, where he could not laugh it off. He knocked. I told him to enter. He came in and stood in front of my desk at a rigid, miserable version of attention, eyes fixed over my head, and I let him stand there for a moment, not to punish him, but because I did not quite know how to begin unmaking a thing I had spent his whole life making. "Sit down, Dominic," I said finally. "I'm your sister in this room. The rank stays on the door." He sat. He looked at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was nothing like the voice on the deck. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he said. "All these years. I said those things about you. To everyone. Why did you let me?" There it was. The only question that mattered, and the one I had been dodging since he was old enough to ask it. "Because you never asked," I said. It came out gentler than I expected. "You decided who I was when you were a kid who needed a hero, and I let you, because it was easier than explaining a life I'm not allowed to explain. Stop. And then you got older, and the story got meaner, and I still let you. because by then telling you the truth would have felt like taking something from you. I loved you more than I needed to be right. That was my choice, Dominic, not yours. I don't get to stand here and act like you did this to me. I built the room you've been living in." He shook his head. His eyes were wet. "That doesn't make it okay. What I said, what I did to your collar." He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes like he could push it all back in. "I hit a wall this morning. I keep counting. All the times. All the guys I said it in front of. I made you into a joke and you paid for my car." "Stop counting," I said. "You'll drive yourself into the ground, and that's not what I want, and it's not what this is. I didn't call you in here to watch you drown. I called you in here to tell you the truth, once, out loud, and then to tell you what happens next." He looked up. "Here's the truth," I said. "I've been a Marine since before you could read. I've done things I will never be able to describe to you, and some of them are why I stand the way I stand and sleep the way I sleep. I carried your gunnery sergeant off a mountain 13 years ago because going back up was the job, and I do the job. I am, by every measure the Corps has, exactly the kind of Marine you've spent your life saying you want to be. And I am your sister, both things, all the way down." He was crying now, quietly, the way he had at our father's funeral, trying not to. "And here's what happens next," I said. "You don't get to fix this with an apology today and a clean slate tomorrow. That's not how respect works. You demanded it your whole life because you thought you were owed it. You're going to learn to earn it the same way I did, the slow way, in front of the same men who watched you lose it. I'm not going to charge you. Gunny Renner isn't going to charge you. But you're going to walk back onto that deck and become someone worth the uniform, and you're going to do it knowing exactly who your sister is. That's the consequence. It's heavier than a charge sheet. Carry it." "I don't know how," he said quietly. "To earn it. I've never had to. I just talked and people believed me." "I know," I said. "That's the whole problem, and it's also the whole answer. You want to know how to earn respect, you go find the men who watched you lose it, and you become the Marine you claim to be in front of them every day when it's boring and nobody's clapping. Respect isn't a speech. It's 1,000 small mornings of doing the thing right when it would be easier to do it loud." I leaned forward. "You've been doing loud your whole life. Now you learn the other one." He was quiet for a moment. "Gunny Renner already looks at me like he's disappointed." "Gunny Renner looked at you this morning like you had your hands on a woman he watched save his life. Because you did. That's not disappointment. That's grief. He'll get past it if you give him a reason to. Give him a reason to." He nodded. He could not speak. He stood, and for a second I thought he might salute me, and I was glad when he did not, because we were not there yet, and a salute you have not earned the meaning of is just theater. He left with more truth than he could hold. I watched the door close behind him, and I felt for the first time in years that the stone was finally out of my boot, even though the walking was going to hurt for a while yet. The days after were not clean, because real things rarely are. Word of what had happened on the deck moved through the company the way word does, faster than any order, and by the end of the week it had reached every corner of the battalion in a dozen slightly different shapes. In some versions I had thrown my brother to the ground myself. In some versions Renner had done worse than a backhand. I let the stories run without correcting them, because a rumor dies faster when you starve it, and because the shape of the truth underneath was solid enough that I did not need to defend it. For Dominic, the fallout was its own kind of school. The squad that had laughed at his joke now did not know how to look at him. He had built his standing among them on being the guy who was better than his sad, useless sister, and that footing was gone, kicked out from under him in a single morning, and there was nothing to replace it with yet. Young Marines are not gentle with a man who has been exposed. He ate alone for a while. He heard the whispers stop when he walked up. He learned what it costs to have your whole personality turn out to be built on a lie, which is a lesson most people are lucky enough to learn in private, and he was learning it in front of everyone. One of his squad mates, a lance corporal named None of My Business, cornered me once near the parking lot, nervous, wanting to apologize on behalf of all of them for laughing. I told him he did not owe me an apology, that he had laughed at a story, not a person, because he did not know the person. But I told him to remember the feeling, the sick drop in his stomach when Renner said my rank, because that feeling was the cost of laughing at someone before you know who they are, and it was a cheap lesson at the price he had paid for it. He said, "Aye, ma'am," and looked like he would remember it. And I hoped he would, because most people get to learn that lesson late and expensive. I did not rescue him from any of it. That was the hardest discipline of my life. Harder than the mountain, because every instinct I had built over 18 years screamed at me to step in and make it easier, to pay the deposit, to sign the form, to be the wall. But being the wall was the thing that had gotten us here. If I softened this for him, I would only be teaching him the old lesson again, that his sister would always absorb the cost of his choices. So I stood back and let him feel the full weight of it, and I trusted him to find the bottom and push off it. I called Gwen once in the middle of that week and told her how much it hurt to watch and do nothing, and she said, "That's not nothing. That's the hardest thing there is. That's love with its hands behind its back." I wrote that down somewhere. Love with its hands behind its back. That was the whole month right there. It was Renner who reached him first, and I did not ask him to. I heard about it later. He found Dominic in the armory one evening, cleaning weapons alone, and he did not go easy on him, but he did not pile on either. He told him the thing that mattered, the thing Dominic had never bothered to ask anyone. "Your sister went back up that hill when everyone else was coming down," Renner told him. "I was bleeding out and I told her to leave me and she said no like it was a stupid question. She took rounds carrying me. She never once told me her name so she could get credit for it. You want to know who she is? That's who she is. Remember that before you open your mouth about her again." Dominic asked him, after a while, quietly, what she had been like. Not the colonel, his sister. And Renner, who had known me for exactly one morning and one mountain, told him she had been the calmest person he had ever seen in the worst moment of his life, and that calm like that is not born, it is paid for, over years, in places nobody thanks you for going. Renner told him something else, too, that got back to me and stuck with me longer than most things do. He told my brother that the worst part of that mountain was not the wound and was not the fear. It was that afterward, for years he had wanted to thank the officer who saved him and had never been able to find her, because she had made sure her name never got attached to it. He said he had carried that debt around like a stone, the not knowing, the not being able to say thank you. And then he looked at Dominic and said, "And you had her at every holiday, at every dinner for your whole life, and you spent it calling her worthless. You had the thing I would have given a year of my life for, and you threw it in the dirt. Fix that, while you still can. Some of us don't get the chance." That was the sentence that turned my brother, I think. Not the backhand, that sentence. I know all this because Renner told me, weeks later, in the same parking lot, in the flat evening light. He told me my brother had listened. He told me my brother had asked good questions. He told me the kid had it in him, that the arrogance had been a shell over something scared and grieving, and that the shell was gone now and what was underneath might actually make a Marine. He asked me how to earn it back, Renner said. I told him you don't earn back respect by talking. You earn it by being the guy who does the work when nobody's watching and takes the blame when it's his and gives the credit when it isn't. I told him his sister's been doing that her whole life. He said, "I know." First time I ever heard him say it like he meant it. I stood in that parking lot and felt something ease in my chest that had been clenched so long I had stopped noticing it. My brother was asking how to earn it back. After 18 years of assuming he was owed everything, he had finally asked the only question that leads anywhere. The repair, when it came slowly, and I would not have trusted it if it had come any other way. We started with careful conversations, the two of us, wary as strangers, because in a way, we were. He had never met the actual me, and I had never let him. We had dinner off base a few times, and the first ones were stiff and full of long silences, and I let the silences sit rather than filling them with the old easy lies. He asked me about the work, and I told him what I could, which was not much, and for the first time in his life, he did not push past the wall of what I could not say. He just nodded and let it be enough. That, more than anything, told me he had changed. The old Dominic needed to be the center of every room. The new one could sit across from a thing he did not fully understand and respected anyway. At one of those dinners, he asked me about our father. Really asked, not the myth, but the man. He wanted to know what Dad had been like as a Marine, whether he had been the hero of the mantle or something more complicated, and I told him the truth, that our father had been a good NCO and a better man, that he had made mistakes and carried them, that he had been proud and stubborn and sometimes hard to love, and worth loving anyway. Dominic listened to all of it. It was the first time in his life he had wanted the real version of anyone in our family instead of the convenient one, and I understood that this was the change, right here, at a cheap table over cooling food. He was learning to want the truth, even when it was less flattering than the story. That is a thing most people never learn. He did not ask me to forgive him, which I appreciated, because a man who asks for forgiveness too early is really asking you to carry his guilt for him, and I was done carrying things for my brother. He knew he had to earn his way back, and he said about it without being told, which is the only way it counts. The thing that told me it was real happened on the deck, where it had all come apart. Dominic asked Captain Ashford for a minute in front of his squad. I was not there. I heard about it from 3 different Marines who could not wait to tell me, which is how I knew it had mattered. He stood in front of the men he had performed for, the men he had made laugh at me, and he told them the truth, plainly, without excuse. I lied about my sister for years, he said. I told you she never served, that she was worthless, that she sat at a desk. None of it was true. She's a lieutenant colonel, she's a raider, she carried Gunny Renner off a mountain under fire. She's the best Marine any of us will ever meet, and I spent my whole life too small to see it. I'm done pretending otherwise. If you laughed because of me, that's on me. I'm telling you now, so you can stop. There is a particular kind of courage in standing in front of the exact audience you performed for and unmaking the performance. And my brother, who I had spent 18 years thinking of as a boy who found that courage on his own and spent it on the truth. He did not do it for me. I was not even there. He did it because it was right, and because a man who is becoming someone worth the uniform does the right thing when the person it is about is not in the room to see it. I did not throw him a parade for it. That is not how earning works either. When he told me he had done it, I said, "Good." And I let the word be enough, because if I made too much of it, I would be teaching him to do the right thing for applause, and I wanted him to do it for its own sake. But inside, something I had grieved for years quietly came back to life. My brother had told the truth about me in the one place it had been buried the deepest, and he had done it standing up. We were not fixed. I want to be honest about that. 18 years of a lie do not dissolve in a month of hard conversations. But we were standing on level ground for the first time in our lives. 2 adults, 2 Marines, 1 family, with nothing between us that was not true. And level ground, it turns out, is the only place you can actually build anything. The months after taught me the difference between being respected and being known, and I'm still learning it. Dominic did the work, not for a week, the way people do when they want credit, but steadily, in the grinding, unglamorous way that actually changes a person. He was first to the things nobody wanted, and last to leave them. He stopped talking about the Marine he was going to be, and started quietly being one. His squad came back to him, not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it, and this time the footing under him was real. Poured slow, set hard. He made a rank on his own merit that fall, a small thing in the scheme of a career, and I was not the one who told him, and I did not pull a single string, and that was the whole point of it. It was Renner who pinned it on him, in front of the same squad, on the same deck, and I heard later that the gunny said a few words when he did it. He said this Marine put his hands on a senior officer in this exact spot and could have ended his career right there. And instead he chose to spend the last few months becoming someone worth keeping, and that the measure of a man is not that he never falls, but what he does on the way back up. Then he told the squad that the officer Dominic had disrespected was the reason he, Renner, was alive to pin anything on anyone, and that they should all be so lucky as to have someone believe in their capacity to change the way she had. I was not there. I heard it 3 times from 3 different Marines who each thought they were the first to tell me. That is how I knew it had landed. When Dominic called to tell me, he was almost shy about it, like he was not sure he was allowed to be proud in front of a sister who had done so much more. I told him pride you earned is yours to feel all the way. I told him our father would have been beside himself. I heard him go quiet on the line at that, the good kind of quiet. Then he said, "Thank you for not charging me. Not for the money over the years, not for raising me, for that, for giving me the chance to be something other than the guy who did that." I told him he was welcome, and that he had done the hard part himself, and that I was only ever going to be able to open the door, that walking through it had always been on him. He said he knew. He said it in the voice of a man who actually did. For my part, I learned that I had spent so long being the wall that I had forgotten how to be seen, and that being seen is not the same as bragging, and that Gwen had been right on that tailgate all those years ago. There is no medal for suffering in silence. They do not hand those out. I had chosen invisibility and called it humility, and it had cost my brother the chance to actually know me and cost me the chance to actually be known by him. And we had both paid that bill for 18 years without either of us reading it. I started in small ways to stop hiding. When a younger officer asked me how I had earned a particular badge, I told her the plain version instead of deflecting. When Dominic asked me a question about the work, I gave him everything I was allowed to give instead of the shrug I had trained myself to give. It felt strange and exposed, like walking a familiar road with my coat off. But every time I did it, the world did not end, exactly the way Gwen had said it would not, and slowly I began to believe that being known was survivable, that it was, in fact, the point. I had spent a career being brave in the places nobody could see. It turned out the bravery I had never practiced was the ordinary kind, the kind where you let the people who love you look straight at you and do not flinch. Gwen watched all this from a distance and said little, but she came to one of our dinners near the end, met my brother properly for the first time, and afterward, in the parking lot, she squeezed my arm and said, "There she is." I asked her what she meant. She said, "The whole you. Been a long time." And she was right, and I had not even noticed the woman coming back until someone who had known her pointed her out. I thought a lot in those months about the photograph on the mantel, about the boy in his socks bringing his hand up to a picture of a hero, while the hero he was looking for stood in the doorway holding his dinner and said nothing. I understood, finally, that I had not been protecting my brother by staying silent. I had been protecting myself. It is easier to be loved for what you provide than to risk being seen for what you are. Because what you provide cannot disappoint anyone, and what you are can. I had hidden behind the checks and the myth because being fully known was the one mountain I had never been willing to climb. Dominic asked me one evening near the end of that year whether I was angry that it had taken something as ugly as the scene on the deck to make him see me. We were driving somewhere, both of us in uniform, and the question came out of a long, comfortable silence. I thought about it honestly before I answered, because he deserved an honest answer now, always. "No," I said. "I'm not angry, I'm relieved. I spent 18 years waiting for a perfect moment to tell you the truth. A soft moment, a moment that wouldn't cost anything. There's no such moment. There never was. It was always going to cost something. What happened on that deck was the bill coming due, and I'd rather have paid it and have you know me than keep the money and stay a stranger to my own brother." He nodded slowly, watching the road. "I still wish I'd been the one to ask," he said, "instead of Gunny having to backhand it into me." "You're asking now," I said. "That's the part that counts. Not when you started, that you started." There was still a question hanging over us, the way there is at the end of any hard year, and it was this: whether pride and honesty can finally live in the same family, or whether one always has to hide so the other can breathe. I did not know the answer yet, but for the first time, I thought we might get to find out together, in the open, instead of me carrying the whole thing alone in the dark. We went to see our father in the spring, on the anniversary, the two of us, both in uniform. It was a bright, plain day, no drama in the sky, just cold sun on the rows of white stone. We found him. Dominic knelt and brushed some grass from the base of the marker with his hand, the way he used to brush the dust off the photograph on the mantel, and I stood behind him with my cover under my arm, and neither of us said anything for a while, because some things do not need saying between people who have finally stopped lying to each other. "Dad said you'd be the hard one," Dominic said at last, still kneeling, his voice low. "I remember him saying it. I thought it meant you were cold, like it was a thing he was warning me about." He looked up at me, and the sun was in his eyes, and he was not a boy in his socks anymore. He was a man in a uniform he had finally earned the right to fill. "He meant it as a compliment, didn't he? He meant you'd be the one who could carry the weight. I finally get it." "He meant both, probably," I said. "He knew me. Hard and load-bearing tend to be the same thing." Dominic stood. He looked at our father's name on the stone, and then he looked at me, and he brought his hand up. Not the way he had as a boy, to a photograph, playing at something he did not understand. He rendered a proper salute, crisp and correct, to the lieutenant colonel standing in front of him, who happened to be his sister. And this time he had earned the meaning of it, so I let him hold it, and I returned it, and for a moment there were just 2 Marines in the cold sun, and 1 family, and nothing left to hide. Then I pulled him into a hug, because I was also just his sister. And I had been the wall for so long that I had forgotten I was allowed to also be soft, and he held on the way he had at the funeral. Except this time he was not trying not to cry, and neither was I. I have thought a lot about what actually turned it. It was not the backhand on the deck, though that is the part people remember. It was not the rank on my collar, or the story about the mountain. It was the moment I finally decided that being known was worth more than being safe. and told my brother the truth, and then loved him enough to make him carry it instead of carrying it for him. If you are the one in your family who gives and lets yourself be misunderstood because correcting it feels like bragging, I want to tell you the thing it took me 18 years and a scene on a parade deck to learn. You are not doing anyone a kindness by disappearing. The people who love you deserve to know who you actually are, and you deserve to be known. The best kind of respect is not the kind you demand, and it is not the kind you hide from. It is the kind that stands in the open, in the light, with nothing left to prove, and lets the truth do the only work that was ever going to matter. I spent 18 years believing that staying silent was the same thing as being kind, and it took a morning I will never forget to teach me that the people who love you deserve to actually know who you are. If you've ever been the one in your family who gives everything and lets yourself be misunderstood, I would really like to hear from you. Would you have pressed charges against my brother, or would you have done what I did? Do you think respect should be demanded or earned in the quiet? And have you ever hidden the best parts of yourself from the people closest to you because being seen felt harder than being useful? Tell me in the comments. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and stay with me, because the truth always finds its way into the light.